Want to watch football without the restrictions of blackouts or cable? Check out expressvpn.com to help you get access to all the live games. Sign up today using the link in the description to get 3 free months. Yo to Bolt fam, it's the director. Chargers fans, it's time for us to have the talk, okay? I've been waiting to have the talk with the Bolt fam this offseason. It's finally time because, yes, we've been talking about a lot of awesome stuff this offseason, right? A lot of hype moving into the 2023 season, but if you guys will remember, it is nothing in comparison to the legendary hype of the 2022 offseason. Of course, kicked off with the incredible trade for Khalil Mack. But one thing that doesn't go very talked about anymore is also the huge free agent signing of this man right here, J.C. Jackson, who the Chargers offered a 5-year, $82 million deal in 2022, of course, in which he took. Now, if you're a Chargers fan, you will know that this story ended in disaster, and almost the worst case possible, right? He would go into this defense not really looking like he knew what he was doing. A lot of, this upside that we talked about kind of looked like it wasn't there. It was non-existent. Then, of course, it would end unceremoniously with one of the worst injuries you can suffer as a corner in the NFL. Pretty nasty knee injury, thus ending the poetic, tragic story of J.C. Jackson in 2022. That is something that a lot of Chargers fans are kind of sensitive about, is this topic. J.C. Jackson, was he a bad investment? Was it a knee-jerk reaction signing by, Tom Telesco and Brandon Staley? This video is kind of about what my view is of the player going forward, because us as football fans and NFL fans, Chargers fans, we're all guilty of having short memories. The player J.C. Jackson was one of the best in the entire NFL before that 2022 tragic season, and I do think some version of that success is still there for the player, and he's already on the track to recover, as we see here in this video from the Chargers Twitter page. Back on the field, what is the potential of J.C. Jackson going into the future? Could he be the comeback player of the year on defense? I do absolutely think that possibility does exist, and we're going to talk a little bit about it in depth in today's video. Will the comeback of J.C. Jackson 2023 be the real deal? Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. So before we do get into this topic, guys, shout out to the sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. If you guys want to get into the best fantasy platform on the web, use code DIRECTOR to match your first deposit up to $100. It's a great way to support the channel while also having some fun along the way. With that, let's get into this J.C. Jackson video, guys. Before we do, hit us up with a like and sub. If you do enjoy this Chargers content, small amount of time you guys take to hit the like, sub, bell notification helps me out a lot. Let's get into this. Lights, camera, action. J.C. Jackson. Spoiler alert, this video is titled "The Comeback Story in the Making" in 2023, okay? And I do think, again, there's a lot of Chargers fans sensitive to the topic who would say that this was a bad investment, a bust, and I'm not going to necessarily argue against that. There absolutely is a chance that this could end up being a bust signing by the Chargers. Me personally, though, I need to take a look at the situation, take a look at the player previous to injury, and take a look at the system and the Chargers team right now as to whether or not, how do I judge J.C. Jackson's chance of success, chance at bouncing back in 2023 through a realistic lens. So let's go ahead and start off with this topic here. J.C. Jackson, the player previous 2022. Now, JC, of course, a member of the New England Patriots, a system in which a lot of Chargers fans and NFL fans would say DBs will only thrive in that system. The moment you see them move away from that team in the Bill Belichick system is the moment you see that success drastically drop. And I'm not going to argue against that. I will also say that a lot of us were talking about the potential of J.C. Jackson not living up to the maybe, 10 interception hype that we were seeing going into the 2022 season, being because Bill Belichick was not present and it was a different defense altogether. That is something that can happen. But that didn't mean that he wasn't going to offer something exciting for the team. One big thing that the Chargers, in my opinion, were trying to accomplish going into the 2022 season was improving their turnover ratio. More specifically, the Chargers, and I think Brandon Staley, wanted to produce more interceptions. Why not bring in the man with the plan, the man with the nickname Mr. INT, to help accomplish that goal? You guys want to know something absolutely insane? Despite missing this last season, right, and despite, or I should say at least the half of the last season, despite how terrible and horrible and tragic that season was for JC, in which he logged 0 interceptions, despite that, J.C. Jackson is still the interception leader since 2019. That's 4 years coming up on a football play where he still leads the league in interceptions despite missing last season. The second place man behind him being Justin Simmons. This is a pretty big deal, dudes. 22 interceptions over those 3 seasons is absolutely massive. And that in terms of, expressing what his skill set is, what he can offer any football team, is something very unique, right? There's not a lot of football players out there that are known for being pretty clutch in terms of turnovers, in terms of positioning, in terms of knowing what they're doing to take the football away from the opposing team. He still leads the league despite missing last season. And that is something I think still exists within a J.C. Jackson. That ball hawking ability that we've seen Brandon Staley trying to assemble all over the roster, being Asante Samuel Jr., even some of the lower tier signings in terms of rookies, right? J.T. Woods has that upside as a ball hawk. Dean Leonard has the upside as a ball hawk. Jasir Taylor, et cetera, et cetera. Brandon Staley wants to generate more turnovers via interception. And that to me is why he so aggressively went after a J.C. Jackson last season. And despite that, again, a lot of us with a short-term memory, even with the last season being as tragic as it was, we also have to remember that this man was, not just in terms of because of he was a Charger, but because of what he produced last season, one of the top respected defensive players in the entire NFL, ranking number 20 in the top 100 players of 2022 last offseason. This was huge, man. And this was one of the driving factors and forces as to why the Chargers fans were so hyped in terms of the potential of J.C. Jackson entering this unit. You had a Khalil Mack. You had a Joey Bosa generating pressure. You had a man opposite him in Asante Samuel. You had a Michael Davis who was turning into a very nice piece for this defense. Topped off with a player like J.C. Jackson, the possibilities were endless in terms of what the Chargers can do in improving their interceptions. This is supposed to be the man that completely turns around what the Chargers are known as on defense. And in my opinion, what was trying to be created there was a defense that generated a lot of hate and was able to capitalize on those opportunities for interceptions with a guy like J.C. Jackson, of course, Derwin James back there. A lot of this freakish ability has recently been buried by, obviously, the recent drama around the player's lack of success in 2023. What happened? Okay, so with all this hype built up into the signing for Chargers fans, for honestly general NFL fans, there's a lot of NFL fans out there that were saying, look out for this Chargers defense next season, man. They're going to be something crazy and something special because of players like JC and Khalil Mack. So what happened? 2022, the collapse. Well, as a lot of you will remember, and it kind of came right off the bat, right? In the offseason, J.C. Jackson had the opportunity to take care of an injury, and I think it was in his foot, right? So he decided to go into a voluntary, a surgery to try and nip that issue in the bud. And unfortunately, despite all of the optimism behind, let's say, a Brandon Staley, even J.C. Jackson himself, and him being able to return rather quickly, that wasn't the case for J.C. right away. It seemed that it would leak into his preseason snaps, obviously his training camp, which he had a really nice outing in training camp that last offseason, guys. Let's also remember that, as well as the first couple of games in the season last year. That decision to go ahead and take that elective surgery, I think is how you would refer to that, to try and take care of a nagging issue he's had the past couple of seasons, maybe even his entire career, did end up costing him time on the football field in 2022. So obviously, right off the bat, not off to a good start. Okay, he's missing time, very valuable reps, very valuable time trying to sync with a new defense, trying to sync with a new defensive-minded head coach. There's a lot of opportunities that were missed because of his lack of presence with the defense. Okay, that, in my opinion, started a bit of a snowball effect. Okay, obviously you're going to be playing through injury. Obviously, Chargers fans week in and week out hoping to see this man on the field. Maybe he returned a little bit too soon. I know there was a game, I think week 4 or week 3, in which he played, and then I think he was absent the week after that. It just kind of tells me that there was a bit of too much or I should say a lack of foresight in terms of what the surgery would do for J.C. Jackson's career, or I should say 2022 campaign, as well as when to bring him back. It feels like the decision to let him do this surgery and the decision to bring him back as soon as they did hindered what J.C. Jackson could do early in the season last year. And honestly, it was rather spectacularly horrible what we witnessed as Chargers fans. I think it was weeks 4 through 7, somewhere around there, and seeing a real sample size of J.C. Jackson. it turned into one of the most horrific, unceremoniously epic, and awful performances I've seen in a long time from a Chargers signing, especially with so much hype behind him. J.C. Jackson, who was eventually benched in favor of Michael Davis, which turned out to be a very good decision for the Chargers, left a pretty sour taste in the mouth of Chargers fans because of how much money was allotted. Of course, at the time, it was considered a pretty friendly deal, but how much money was allotted to J.C. Jackson just to see it become an epic collapse, an epic letdown. J.C. Jackson was not showing not just, the capability of going out there and creating turnovers, but also just more simple, like the simple stuff, right? The simple stuff you would expect from a pretty decent DB in coverage. He could not keep up with, obviously, guys like we're seeing on the screen here. The big touchdown to the tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs. Is it Watson? I think we're seeing on the jersey. That was like their second or third string tight end, and J.C. Jackson unable to handle coverage of a tight end over the middle that's not even atop the depth chart. Is that kind of, you guys kind of getting where I'm at here? J.C. Jackson, given the assignments to cover some of the better, wide receivers in the league, definitely finding a lot of struggle in maintaining any success versus these guys. It was pretty disastrous. It was very disastrous. And a part of me wanted to say, well, it's probably because of that injury, which in some part is probably true. The injury, bringing him back a little bit early, that probably did pay a little bit of reasoning as to why he was struggling so dramatically early in the 2023 season. But I would say the biggest thing that was probably working against J.C. Jackson in 2022 was the lack of awareness in terms of what he is as a football player. Maybe not the lack of awareness, but the lack of reasoning in terms of using him to his strengths. Okay, Brandon Staley, one of the biggest, gurus in defensive minded head coaches in the NFL, seemed to want to turn J.C. Jackson into something he wasn't known for. J.C., in my opinion, from my perspective coming into the 2022 season as a fresh new Charger, was more known as a slot/man, dominant corner. A guy that's really good in man coverage. Put him in zone, I think we were aware that he was less successful there. Be it, in certain situations, he could be good, he could be bad. But for the most part, I think a lot of us understood this was a man press corner that demanded, opportunities to play up against these players in man press. And we didn't see a lot of that from Coach Staley or J.C. Jackson through the first couple of weeks of the season. No, we actually saw a lot of maybe situations where J.C. was kind of forced into these maybe zone press situations, a lot of zone coverage. And it just didn't seem to be clicking very well with J.C. Jackson, as we saw a lot of opportunities like we did here with, tight end Watson, and then, of course, number 14, I think that's Sutton, for the Denver Broncos, just kind of walking all over the man. And this, to me, does kind of spell out a couple of different things against JC, right? All of a sudden, you're looking at an elective surgery that turned disastrous. You're looking at it too early of a return, kind of re-aggravating an injury early in the season. And then you're looking at a lack of fit in terms of system, right? It did not feel like JC had his footing when coming into the early games of the season as a zone corner, or maybe a hybrid corner, zone and man, which is kind of what we saw a lot of early in the year for the Chargers and Brandon Staley. A lot was working against him. Still, despite that, because of how much he's being paid, because of his repertoire before coming onto the Chargers system, because of how much promise he showed as a football player, it was a bit of a letdown. Despite the situation around him, we were hoping to see him overcome these obstacles to still go out there and at least perform admirably. What we saw was disastrous. He was, without a doubt, the worst corner on the field for a couple of weeks there, and it cost him, ultimately, snaps in favor of Michael Davis in the end. Now, this next segment here is going to be called A Corner Turned Too Late, okay? And this is something that I want Chargers fans to understand. Just because a majority of the time that we saw J.C. Jackson in 2022 was disastrous, and it seemed like he wasn't going to fit, that we were paying too much money, that he was a liability out there in coverage, doesn't mean that we didn't see some good things. We did see some good things. And a majority of those good things were seen in the later games for J.C. Jackson. The Browns game, I think more in particular the Seahawks game where he ultimately ended up getting injured, was where I finally started to see some clicking. Okay, and not just clicking in terms of J.C. Jackson, which of course that is very important. The individual talent needs to go out there and perform, but also clicking in terms of the coaching. It felt like for the first time since seeing J.C. Jackson as a Charger the Bolts were starting to use him appropriately. I started to see more snaps for him in the slot. I started seeing more snaps of him in man press and sometimes in even hybrid coverage. It was starting to feel like Brandon Staley was letting J.C. Jackson work to his strengths. And that is something extremely important that I think the Chargers finally started to let up on, finally started to figure out towards the end of JC's season in 2023. And it's something that if we go back and watch some of my live reactions to, you guys would know that I like to live stream during the games with you guys. If you guys go back and watch some of those streams, you will see me commenting on JC's performance in the Seahawks game in particular, right? It's like, wow, finally we're starting to see, that sticky coverage that we're hoping to see. Finally, we're starting to see the positioning. Finally, we're starting to see, opportunities for interceptions, even though that ultimately didn't happen. The version of J.C. Jackson we're hoping to see was finally starting to show some flashes. And to me, that was because, for one, I think some distance between him and the recovery from that surgery was helping a little bit in terms of his comfort, his ability to move around and keep up in coverage. And two, I also think the bigger reason was because of the coaching finally letting up and letting him play to his strengths. Those things combined started to give me a glimmer of hope as to what we're going to see in 2022 with J.C. Jackson and the promises that were made for him to become this, big difference maker as a man press corner that can go out there and cause some interceptions. Unfortunately, it was a little bit too little, too late. J.C. Jackson, of course, went down with injury and ended that unspectacular season. And it made a lot of us kind of forget or even push aside any sort of hope that J.C. would turn out to be a good investment by the Chargers in the long term. Okay? And that is where we are today. We stand today as a team that put a big investment, one of the rare, opportunities that we see this team actually put a big investment down for a DB, for a superstar kind of name player. And we're kind of sitting in that feeling of, man, what did we do? Like, what Chargers fans are like, when you bring up the name J.C. Jackson, it's usually met with an eye roll, disappointment, a sigh. I understand the current state and emotions of Chargers fans behind the name J.C. Jackson. But that doesn't mean there isn't hope for the future. As we saw at the top of this video, JC, despite that really horrible knee injury, is showing signs of return. He's looking good out there, okay? And this does give me hope that he's going to be ready for kickoff. The man with the most interceptions despite missing the season last year, majority of the season last year, is back on track to return. The man in which the Chargers coaching is starting to understand how to play towards his strength is making his return. The man who has had more time to integrate himself into the defense that the Chargers have developed here over the last couple of seasons in the Brandon Staley era is on his way to a return. And I think more importantly than not, the man who is on a mission to prove everybody wrong. He's already started talking about his comeback tour this season. Is very likely to return close to full health this season. And there's a lot of potential there. Despite Chargers fans, myself included, NFL fans, completely forgetting the name J.C. Jackson because of, the recent drama behind his performance and his injury, that player still exists in J.C. coming into this season. And I think a lot of what the Chargers have discovered about themselves as a team and what they want to be in terms of their identity as a defense is actually going to help J.C. Jackson quite a bit going into the 2023 season. This next segment is going to be called a man coverage conversion / the current state of the DBs. Okay? Now, if you watched the Chargers season last year, just from my observation, it seemed that Brandon Staley and the defense as a whole kind of took a shift around the mid-part, maybe late mid-part of the season last year. And this is something I've kind of slowly seen implemented over the time Brandon Staley has started taking over the defense, right? It feels like the Chargers, who are primarily like a cover 3 team, maybe a cover 2 shell team for a long time, are starting to move out of zone, maybe a bit more into man. And I think every season the Chargers started investing in these players with these specific skill sets has kind of told me what the Chargers want to be in terms of their defensive identity. The drafting of an Asante Samuel Jr., primarily a man corner, right? The signing last season of Bryce Callahan, primarily a man corner. You got a Derwin James, one of these hybrid safeties, a JT Woods, and Alohi Gilman. These guys playing a bit of run support, a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage. I would more consider, guys that are a bit more successful in man press systems. The Chargers are creating something in terms of an identity that I really like. It's very exciting as a football fan to see something like this work. And that's a defense that features primarily man zone, or I should say man press corners, man press DBs, a system that implements that kind of thing with really nice pass rushing weapons, right? And in that case, the Chargers do have a couple of really nice ones in Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, and now Tuli Tuipulotu. Okay, this defense, in my opinion, is being molded into a man press system. And this is something that J.C. Jackson, if you guys would remember, in his time with the New England Patriots, very much so thrives in. J.C. Jackson, before even coming to the Chargers, as still a New England Patriot, before any of the narratives of him being connected to the Chargers, in my view, in my perspective, was a man press corner, maybe even a slot corner, if you wanted to dig deep into where he was playing on the field for the Patriots. Finally, the Chargers, after a couple of seasons of assembling the pieces, maybe creating a playbook of their own, something that Brandon Staley did utilize quite a bit with the Los Angeles Rams in his time as the coordinator for the best defense in the league at the time. Finally, I think the Chargers are ready to take that next step as a man coverage defense, and that is something that's really going to help a J.C. Jackson succeed in 2023. And if you guys go back and watch 2022 season, you will notice a lot of zone, maybe primarily zone in the first half of the season, and then a lot more man as we exit and get into the second half of the season. As an identity, I think that's going to work out very well for the Chargers. And again, it has a lot to do with the talent that you're seeing at DB. I think Derwin James is a big factor in this. I think J.C. Jackson will eventually be a big factor in this. I think our best corner right now in Asante Samuel plays a big factor in this. But in the end, it's going to be because of these guys as well. And this is something that we're seeing the Chargers invest heavily in the last couple of seasons too, and that's going to be the pass rush, right? The Bosa, Mack, and Tuli effect is going to help this out a lot. And like we've alluded to in previous videos, the kind of formula that you're looking for if you're a Brandon Staley on defense is a man press defense that also has a lot of heat coming off the edge, which puts up more opportunities for interceptions in the Chargers' favor, right? You got a Khalil Mack and a Joey Bosa screaming. You got guys that are kind of known for going up there and picking up the football, and Asante Samuel, Derwin James, J.C. Jackson roaming out there in coverage. You're going to see a lot of opportunities capitalized on because of the specific pieces that have been put together. It just feels like it took the Chargers a little bit of time to figure that out, to sort that out in terms of what they want to be as a defense. And that just really works into favor for J.C. Jackson, okay? So now that we kind of know where the Chargers are headed as a defense and their system, their scheme, what J.C. Jackson was hoping to bring last season, why everything was working against him last season so dramatically, what do we think about J.C. Jackson moving forward into 2023? Okay? I'm going to give you guys two examples here. The first example called a J.C. best case, okay? In my opinion, J.C. Jackson has the ability, and there's a very realistic, scenario where this turns out exactly this way. J.C. does have a huge comeback campaign in 2023. I think the quarterbacks that he's going up against give him a great shot at generating turnovers that are very reminiscent to why he was signed by the Chargers in the first place, why he earned the name Mr. INT. He's going up against Tua, Tannehill, Garoppolo, who at times in certain situations could definitely put up a lot of interceptions. Fields, Goff, Love, Jordan Love of the Packers, Wilson. These guys are, susceptible. And JC will have an opportunity to capitalize on that with the kind of pressure that Tuli, Joey, and Khalil are going to be providing from the edge. So I think the best case for J.C. Jackson, in my opinion, I think he logs 6 interceptions. I think he plays 80% of his games, if not more. And I do think the best case scenario for him is a comeback player of the year. And I do think that's rather reasonable to consider in terms of what could realistically happen in 2023. But what's the worst case scenario? Okay, and this is something I have to say, I don't know if I feel it's equally as likely because I do think a lot less things are working against JC this season, but it is something that's likely. JC could continue to struggle in the Chargers defensive system. Let's say the Chargers still do want to be, more of a hybrid zone man kind of defense, maybe, edging more on the zone, side of things. Maybe JC still has a lot of issues, meshing into that. He wants to play man. Chargers are forcing him in zone. It's causing all the same problems we saw last season, but over again in 2023. That is a possibility as well. And if that's the case, I think the Chargers are more to blame. Brandon Staley, Tom Telesco, these guys are more to blame in terms of not trying to capitalize on the money that they spent by utilizing J.C. Jackson's talents appropriately. Okay, if they wanted to be a zone system or a zone team, they probably should have gone after a different player, right, in terms of their zone. Because I know that Asante can play zone. We know Michael Davis can play zone. We know Duran can play zone. But for the most part, the Chargers, their strengths lie in man coverage. And if the Chargers and Brandon Staley don't want to move in that direction a little bit more aggressively this season, it is going to work against J.C. Jackson. And if that's the case, the Chargers will probably be looking forward into when they can cut ties with J.C., which it's a pretty complicated contract. Long story short, the out for the Chargers is in 2025, okay? So we would need to play him in 2023 and 2024. Then the opportunity to cut him would come in 2025, where the Chargers would save $14 million in cap space while also losing $5 million in 2025 and $5 million in 2026 to dead cap. Okay, that's the worst case scenario. A lot of Chargers fans in the comments are going to ask me personally, like, director, what do you think is going to happen with JC? Here's my guess. Okay, my guess is that I think I'm leaning way more on the side that JC has a really nice bounce back season. Do I think that he's comeback player of the year? I think it's possible, but I think what's more possible is that the reasons behind him and his lack of success last year are going to be less present, right? I think being removed from the recovery from that surgery is going to help a lot. I think the fact that we're already seeing him, in his recovery and training camp says a lot. I think obviously the motivation is going to be there for JC. I think the biggest factor that plays in it for me is the coaching, understanding what they have in JC. Maybe they were pushing him too far out of his element. Now they understand they probably want to stick to what works for him. I think all of this kind of comes together for me saying he's going to have a solid season. I think by the end of the season, Chargers fans will view him and Asante Samuel Jr. as maybe 1A, 1B in terms of corner. And if we're lucky, maybe JC does turn that corner into being that interception king that we're hoping to get pre-2022. But my guess is that he's going to have a solid season. I would say viewed very much so as what we saw from Asante Samuel this last year. Which is definitely more than fair in terms of it's a comeback kind of season for Mr. INT. So you guys in the comment section below, let me know what you think. I think JC is due for a nice season. I think Chargers fans, what I'm trying to tell you guys is if you want to keep your expectations low, that's totally fine by me. But based on what I saw last season, the evidence of everything working against him and what he was before that tragic season, my expectation for JC is to be some version of what we were hoping he would be upon signing. And that's a very dang good, man coverage, cornerback, man press kind of DB that can go out there and make a name for himself as Mr. INT, generate those interceptions, help the Chargers in terms of getting the ball back for their offense. I think that's absolutely possible, and that's where my expectations are going to be this season. So you guys let me know in the comment section below what you think. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me. This has been The Director. If you liked what you saw here, hit us up with a like and sub on your way out. We'll see you next time, and as always, bolt up and stay Froster. Mr. INT is back, baby.